Hello, this is Tony Heller from RealClimateScience.com, setting the record straight about climate. In this video, I'm going to reveal the cure for global warming alarmism. The press is full of hysterical stories today about carbon dioxide levels being the highest in human history. They say that carbon dioxide levels in 2018 reached 408 parts per million. Well, that sounds bad. We must have really messed up the planet. But before we go and put on our gas mask like the Times of India shows, let's try doing some thinking instead. The purpose of human lungs is to convert carbohydrates in our blood and oxygen in the air into energy which our body can use. Carbohydrates are basically made up of carbon and water. Human lungs burn carbohydrates in our bloodstream and release carbon dioxide and water vapor into the air. If it's cold outside, you can often see the water vapor from your breath condensing. But the carbon dioxide is invisible, at least for most people. A few unusually gifted people like Greta Thunberg believe that they can see carbon dioxide. This must be very distracting because when your lungs exhale, you release 40,000 parts per million CO2 into the atmosphere. That's 100 times higher than the CO2 level which the press is hysterical about today. It must be very distracting for Greta to have a huge cloud of CO2 visible in front of her face every time she exhales. Let's put the 408 parts per million CO2 in perspective. 408 parts per million is about the same as 4 parts per 10,000. This is a picture of Madison Square Garden in New York, which holds 20,000 people. If each of these 20,000 people represented one gas molecule in the atmosphere, then only 8 people in this crowd would represent carbon dioxide molecules. Almost all of the other people in the audience would represent nitrogen, oxygen, or water vapor molecules. The increase in CO2 over the past century has been 1 part per 10,000. That would be the equivalent of packing an extra 2 people into Madison Square Garden. I think one of those 2 people is at the concession stand and the other one's in the bathroom. That's why you can't see them in this picture. The point being that if we put the numbers in perspective, adding an extra 2 people to Madison Square Garden doesn't really sound like a crisis. Greta likes to ride on fossil fuel powered trains, eat food which is wrapped in plastics made from petroleum, and transported to Sweden from the tropics on diesel-powered ships. But despite her unique gift, she probably has no idea what carbon dioxide levels are on the train. People have done studies on trains and found that CO2 levels get close to 3,000 parts per million, or more than 8 times the normal atmospheric level. That kid who needed the gas mask at 408 parts per million would have a terrible time on a train. And it's even worse in a car. After 22 minutes, CO2 levels in a car can get up to 6,000 parts per million. That is 15 times higher than the 400 parts per million which the press is hysterical about today. And inside a house, CO2 levels sometimes get up to 2,500 parts per million. Some people build aquariums in their houses full of coral, like this one inside of somebody's house in Israel. If ocean acidification was a real problem, there would be no way you could keep an aquarium like this in your house. The ambient CO2 levels in your house would be much too high for the corals to survive. Now let's get to the solution to climate alarmism. Commercial greenhouse operators pump the CO2 levels inside their greenhouses way up in order to make the plants grow faster and use less water. Life needs and loves carbon dioxide. Here's an article explaining the optimal way to grow marijuana inside your greenhouse. It says, research has shown that many crops, including cannabis, benefit from 900 to 1,200 parts per million CO2. We need to get the word out to climate alarmists that optimal marijuana growing conditions require that we burn a lot more fossil fuels. That's the carrot for climate alarmists, but the stick is at the bottom of the page. It says, plant growth ceases when the level of CO2 gets below 200 parts per million. So if climate alarmists are successful in creating the zero carbon world they say they want, their weed is going to stop growing. Once they find that out, that'll put a quick end to climate alarmism. And in the meantime, climate alarmists need to remember to stay inside their safe 2,500 parts per million home and never step outside into that dangerous 408 part per million CO2 world on the other side of their door. Let's finish up with some real science. Life thrives at high CO2 levels, and the greatest explosion of life on Earth occurred 540 million years ago when CO2 was at its peak of 7,000 parts per million. There's no rational basis for the Extinction Rebellion. Earth's history shows us the exact opposite of what they believe. Visit Toto on the web at RealClimateScience.com. He's been pulling back the curtain on junk science and propaganda for a long time.